moving quickly. Another handoff to Rankin. Rankin finds a hole. He's at the 30. Makes it to the 20. He's got one man to beat. Rankin walks into the end zone. Into the backfield. Braden Wright looks over top. He's going to try to find a man. He's got Alec Tatum. Tatum bobbles it, but he's in the end zone. What a connection between Braden Wright and Alec Tatum. Handoff to Rankin. Rankin right up the middle, and he's in the end zone for a Bearcat touchdown.
You that the views expressed in today's show do not reflect the views of KZLX, KNWT, or Northwest Missouri State University. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show.
You're listening to the Weekend Sports Kickoff.
Into the backfield, Braden Wright looks over top. He's going to try to find a man. He's got Alec Tatum. Tatum bobbles it, but he's in the end zone. What a connection between Braden Wright and Alec Tatum.
Every Friday from 2 to 5 p.m. on X106 and streaming live from the TuneIn app.
As it's 1st and 10 from the Ichabod 39-yard line. Braden Wright, he steps back. This time he rolls to his left away from pressure. Looks down the field. That is Caden Davis down to the 1-yard line. He might have gotten close to the end zone, but he was wide open down the field, and it's a touchdown for the Bearcats as the connection between Braden Wright and Caden Davis.
Andrew Botwinick, Austin McNorton, Nolan Brooks, and your host, Jacob Blair.
Bearcats moving quickly. Another handoff to Rankin. Rankin finds a hole. He's at the 30. Makes it to the 20. He's got one man to beat. Rankin walks into the end zone, and the Bearcats take their first lead here in their first home game of 2019.
All views and opinions expressed in today's show do not reflect KZLX, KNWT, or Northwest Missouri State University. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the show.
Welcome into the Weekend Sports Kickoff here on X106. Also streaming live on the KNWT Channel 8 Facebook page. Jacob Blair, Andrew Botwinick, Nolan Brooks, Sam Steinmeier with us today. Austin McNorton has some duties with the women's basketball game later today and then tomorrow as well. So we've got all his picks, and we'll go over those when we get through the show. But start, like we always do, Bearcat football. Easy win over Northeastern last week. Don't really need to talk a whole lot about that. I think the big talking point this week is you've got a big matchup with Fort Hays State, as well as where Northwest sits in the regional rankings as we get just 2 games now from playoff time.
Yeah, this is definitely the biggest game of the year for Northwest. Having to go to a tough place like Fort Hays, and you've lost 2 years in a row to them. Definitely looking for revenge, and also it's a must-win because if you lose this game, you're out of the playoffs. So it's definitely biggest game of the year, and it's definitely going to be tough on the road.
Well, and the implications of this, like you already said, are just humongous. And just to add on to the fact that Fort Hays and UCM being the next 2 matchups for Northwest, they're both those teams are fighting for a spot in this central region. And so just the amount of intensity that is going to be surrounding this game, and, it's a win or go home essentially 2 weeks in a row, ideally, if you look at it the right way, because UCM right now undefeated, and then Fort Hays 7-2, and really, if Fort Hays manages to win, Northwest is done. If Northwest beats Fort Hays and moves on and they play UCM and they lose that game, Northwest could be done again just because of how good the region is. So the implications around this are humongous.
Well, and we talked last week about this game against Northeastern. You weren't going to get a lot out of it because of where the Northeastern program is right now. A 79-0 final score, but between the 2 teams, Northwest just offensively and defensively dominated that game, as was expected. Didn't get a lot of good graces with the ranking committee because where it sits right now, Ferris State sit at number 1 in the region, Central Missouri at number 2, Ouachita Baptist 3, Harding at 4, Indy is at 5, Grand Valley State at 6, and then Northwest Missouri at 7. The top 7 make the playoffs. Number 1 seed gets a bye. Missouri Western is at 8, Henderson State at 9, Fort Hays State at 10. Where this gets interesting is where Northwest ended up. Last week they were at number 6. They didn't lose. They won a game by 79 points and dropped. Grand Valley State was the one that jumped Northwest. You also look at Indy. They were unbeaten before last week. They lost to Lindenwood. They only dropped to 5. You look at the GLVC conference, Lindenwood's winning that conference right now. Not Indy. Truman State's playing really well right now. They're a one-loss team. They play Indy this week. So you've got another top 25 matchup in terms of the coaches poll. Ferris State plays Grand Valley State. You've got Northwest playing Fort Hays, who's at that 10 spot, and then they turn around and play Central Missouri. A lot of these teams are playing each other. So where this sits right now, we've talked about there's a lot of different ways this can happen. And the way I see it with Northwest is you win 2 games, you probably end up at the 4. You lose one of these 2, you're out. And that's a tough place to be in.
Well, and it's even tougher because this is a team in Fort Hays State that Northwest has struggled against. The past 3 years, they have lost the last 3 matchups between this team. It seems like in the MIAA, Fort Hays State has had the better of Northwest the last couple of years. That's going to be an interesting kind of point to come across. You look at how Northwest defense has played. They haven't allowed a touchdown in 9 quarters on defense. Yes, you had the pick 6, but you have not allowed a defensive touchdown in 9 quarters. Granted, you've played Northeastern State and you've played Lincoln, but 9 quarters to not give up a touchdown is impressive in its own. You still have the number 1 rushing defense in the MIAA. You still have big plays like Amani Donadell, another big name, Justin Rankin, who's finally had some good confidence games to build up underneath. This team is firing on all cylinders. They're moving the ball down the field almost at will. They're able to get the ball in the end zone. They score the ball efficiently. But like you said, Jacob, this is win or go home. You win against Fort Hays State, you're still alive. You win against UCM the last game of the season, you're sitting high, you're sitting pretty, but if you lose, you're out.
Where this gets so interesting is just because Missouri Western, they lost to Northwest, they beat Fort Hays. Fort Hays lost to Missouri Western. So if Northwest loses, then you kind of have this round robin where everyone's beat everyone, but everyone's lost to someone else. So you really don't know where to move everybody within those rankings. Then if Northwest turns around and beats Central Missouri, then Northwest beat UCM. UCM a one-loss team. Northwest, if they lose to Fort Hays, a 2, plus some of the other teams playing each other. Best case scenario for Northwest, go win your 2 games, and we don't have to talk about any of this. Yeah. But because of where everything sits, Missouri Western already have played the tough games this year. They could win out, and they'll be at a 2-loss team. And the arguments aren't just about Northwest, because if you win both your games, your strength of schedule is going to go way up. You're in the playoffs. But with these other teams sitting back there, and I mentioned you had Truman State, who's a 1-loss team, playing Indy. They win that game this week in the GLVC. All of a sudden, they become a team in the conversation at a 1-loss team. Their strength of schedule goes up. So you've got a lot of different teams to look at right now in terms of this region.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the implications for Northwest playing just Fort Hays and UCM goes up even more, because then you got to look at it. Does Northwest, with that strength of schedule, should they win out, does that put them up above Grand Valley? Does that put them up above Indy? There's so many different ways you can move this around, and that makes it really difficult to be able to justify for somebody as far as a team if they're better or not. But I think Northwest is set up in a way to basically increase their strength of schedule and their resume. They're set up to be put in a better spot if they can win out. But at the same time, like I said, they're also in a spot where even if you beat Hayes, if you drop to UCM the very next week and UCM wins this week, you could still be out. And just putting so many different scenarios makes it really confusing and makes the region even more confusing.
Well, and with Northwest, the 1 loss is to Nebraska Kearney, and a lot of that was a bad loss. You look at Nebraska Kearney, it really isn't. That's a good football team. You look at the top 3 teams in the MIAA, they probably should have beat Central Missouri last week. Some crazy stuff happened up there in Kearney for UCM to stay undefeated. Kearney had a chance to win the game on a field goal. That field goal's blocked. UCM recovers, and then on the next play, scores on the final play of the game to win the game. If you look at Kearney, they lost to Fort Hays by just 6. So this is a good football team. It shouldn't be a bad loss on Northwest's resume, because Kearney is a couple plays away from probably being inside the top 7 in terms of the regional rankings. Instead, they're pretty far down because they dropped those games by a possession. But Fort Hays, talk about the game this week. They started with a brutal 2-game schedule, dropped their first 2 games of the year, a 34-30 loss to Central Missouri, and then a 28-17 loss to Missouri Western. Since then, 7-game win streak, and then they've beat the teams handily. The teams they're supposed to beat handily, and then the tougher teams, they're winning close games. So you look at this week, a close game is imminent. This one's going to come down to the last couple possessions, but Fort Hays, they're used to that this season.
The big thing, too, and Al preface was saying that this shouldn't be a challenge for Northwest. And I know that's a very stretched thing to say. It shouldn't. You have one of the best defenses in the MIAA. We've talked the entire time about how they're number 1 in rushing defense in the MIAA. The amount of interceptions they get, the sacks that they get, the pressure that they get to the quarterback. They rattle the opposing offense regardless of where they're at. They're also very disciplined. They're the number 1 in the MIAA in terms of fewest penalties with 43 this season. They don't have a lot of mistakes on defense, and the only game that you've been able to pinpoint out is the Nebraska-Kearney game where they had 4 turnovers, and they lose that game by just 7. If you have 4 more turnovers than the other team and you only lose by 7, you're still playing a great game of football. You've just been the lesser of some unfortunate events, but as long as Northwest can hold the football and they're able to move the ball down the field, their defense is going to go out there and they're going to do what their defense has done every single week, it seems like.
And with the 2 games coming up, I think the challenge here is you've got 2 of the best passing attacks in the league for the secondary that you have to deal with. Chance Fuller, who last year was the surprise starting quarterback in the game against Fort Hays, came in and beat Northwest. This year, he's 210 for 319 in terms of passing, 4 interceptions, over 2,700 yards and 30 touchdowns. This is a good quarterback with a great receiving core, and it's going to be a situation where Northwest secondary, they've been playing really well all season long, really. Then they had to deal with some injuries early, but you had some guys step up. The next 2 weeks are your challenge, because if you think this is tough, wait till you see them the next week.
Exactly, and I think that's what makes these next 2 weeks so scary is, Northwest, for 3 weeks in a row, you basically played a run central team, and then before that, Kearney's a part of that 3 weeks, a run central team. You haven't seen a dynamic passing offense that can really light up a football field from the get-go. And now Northwest, they're going to have to adjust to that. And, that's part of it. But for good reason, Northwest has a top-ranked pass defense. They've shown it before. They've shown you that even if a quarterback is on, they can still make him have a tough game. You're going to give up scores. It's inevitable that against a team like Fort Hays or UCM, there's going to be opportunities where they just outplay you. But at the same time, if you can manage to hold them to 14 points and then your offense can find a way to light a fire and start producing on your own end, then maybe that 14 points isn't as bad and you can come back from it a lot easier.
Welcome back to the Weekend Sports Kickoff here on X106, also streaming live on the KNWT Channel 8 Facebook page. Jacob Blair, Andrew Botwinick, Nolan Brooks, and Sam Steinmeier. So we'll now take a broad look at the college basketball landscape in terms of Division I. Talk about some of the bigger conferences, some mid-major teams that we like, as well as give our way to early Final Four and national champion prediction. Would never is right because 2 of these teams or 3 of these teams always up in the same region. We'll get to that. Start with the American Conference, a conference that's on the verge that I think, for me, it should be Power 7 in basketball. You include the Power 5 plus the American and the Big East. So we're going to start with the American. Memphis, really good this year, a program to watch out for. Cincinnati, they are always a dangerous team. They weren't so the other night against Ohio State, an ugly basketball game. I believe the score was 5-0, 6 minutes into the game in favor of Cincinnati. Some bad basketball, as kind of everything was this first week.
Yeah, everyone's just trying to get back into the swing of things, just see where their programs start. I'll tell you, one team that didn't really play bad basketball, and one player particularly, is James Wiseman from Memphis. He played outstanding this week, and may have been like a lesser opponent, but still is good to see him playing well in the opening debut for Memphis.
Yeah, I think it's definitely between Cincinnati and Memphis. I don't think there's really any other competition. Houston potentially could be in the mix, but I don't think they'll stay in the mix nearly as long as Cincinnati and Memphis will, going back and forth.
I think Wichita State will show some improvement. I think it's Memphis's conference right now. If they want it, they've got the best team. They've got the most talent. We saw that they're a high flying team as well. They've got a lot of size. They've got a lot of speed. So it's a team built to do well this season, but they are going to play some teams that play a style of basketball that even if they aren't necessarily better talent-wise, it's sometimes tough to win those games. Wichita State, Cincinnati, Houston the same way. So it's Memphis's conference, but I think it won't be runaway. They'll still have to earn it and win some close games. Next conference, you've got the ACC, and this one right now, four ranked teams to start the season: Virginia, Duke, North Carolina, Louisville. I think those are the four teams that are going to fight for this conference, and it's going to be a fun one throughout the season.
Well, I think the ACC is going to be one of the conferences to watch this year.
As always.
Yeah. I mean, the ACC has made it so that they are a basketball conference, and I think that Duke reinserting itself in a way, getting a humongous win over Kansas to start the season was big.
That game was more the Duke-Kansas game was who wanted to lose more, not who wanted to win more.
Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah,
was
28
rough
turnovers for
basketball.
KU. Yeah, it was not good. But nonetheless, a Duke win in that game. But Louisville resurging and getting into the top 5 rankings for the first time in a while, I think is going to change up the scope a little bit. Louisville's going to make some noise finally again in the ACC, but I really, really like North Carolina. I really like that Cole Anthony
He scored the same amount of points as Syracuse did in their entire game against Virginia.
I really like how their team
That's a
system is
defensive
going.
game, though.
so.
Like, you look at those two teams. Really, I didn't.
It's
think
defensive, and then there's just being bad at putting an orange ball into an orange rim, and Syracuse did that in their opening game. You should never score less than 40 points in a game. You get more than 40, you can chalk it up to good defense. If you score less than 40, you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and Syracuse is one of the outside teams who aren't in the top 25 that people are pegging to fight for that ACC championship.
Got to score more than 34 points to do it.
You definitely do. For me, I agree with Nolan. I think North Carolina is a team to look out for. Cole Anthony is probably the best player in the ACC and possibly in the nation. You look at James Wiseman. You also have LaMelo Ball down in Australia. All those guys vying for the number 1 pick in the NBA. But the ACC is probably the number 1 conference in basketball, so it's going to be a tight race. No matter who ends up at the top, there's probably going to be at least 4 of these guys playing in March.
I'm so mad that you guys said North Carolina because I thought I was going to be the only one that was going to pick them. That's the only reason why I was visibly upset, is because I was like, oh, there's Duke, there's Virginia, there's Louisville now. I'm like, surely we're going to get a couple of mixed responses. I'm also picking North Carolina. I've watched their basketball year in and year out, and this is the most revamped they've been. Virginia's kind of taken a step back in terms of what talent they have left. Duke, obviously, without Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, and Cam Reddish, they're not nearly as good as they were last year. North Carolina looks to be the one of, other than Louisville, to have actually improved since last year.
I think this conference, it's a little bit more spread out this year. Normally, the 7, 8, 9, 10 teams are good enough to get some upsets, make the tournament. This year, it seems like those teams have kind of faltered a little bit. It's going to be those 4, and because those teams might have some easier, they're still going to have conference opponents are tough, but they're still going to have some easier matchups. They win more games. There's less upsets in the ACC this year, so I think you end up final game Duke, North Carolina for the ACC championship, and by then I think Duke gets it figured out. There's a lot of potential with that Duke team. They'll have it figured out, and they'll win the ACC, and then we'll say goodbye to them early in the tournament.
What honestly makes the ACC even more intimidating is that, honestly, North Carolina, Duke, and Louisville could all be 1 seeds come tournament time. That is a scary conference to play in when your top 3 teams could all be a number 1 seed. Just watch the ACC this year. no matter what conference you support outside of that, just watch them because they're playing good basketball there. You got some revamped talent. You got some new talent coming in, so there's just a lot to watch.
Legitimate shot.
They have to stay undefeated if they want to. And if they do, say, because either LSU or Alabama's going to have one loss, and Ohio State, Penn State's going to have one loss. So you could potentially see Clemson and Baylor, being the only two viable college football playoff teams if they do stay undefeated that are able to get into the college football playoff. Now, whether the committee will put them in or not, I don't know. They haven't had as tough a schedule as LSU or Penn State or Ohio State or all of them, but I still think an undefeated Big 12 team deserves to at least be in the conversation for the college football playoff.
And I think what's unfortunate for Baylor, they should be in the conversation, but they're not going to get put in, honestly, unless, like you said, something wild would have to happen. But even then, if something wild happens, say Penn State loses to Ohio State, does Penn State automatically get thrown out? Their resume is fantastic, and if your one loss is to the number one, the first ranking comes out, and that number one is Ohio State, if your only loss is to them, then they're sitting basically right where Georgia is right now. Because, Georgia's got their one loss, but if they went out and they play Alabama in the college football champion or the SEC title and they win, then it changes up a whole lot. So there's so many these top six are so clumped together that it basically prevents Baylor or somebody just outside of that top six from even getting in because of how clumped together these teams are.
And we've mentioned Baylor this whole time. Minnesota is another team that could jump in there, especially this week because they play Penn State tomorrow. The rest of their season shapes up. They'd go to Iowa to play the 18th ranked Iowa Hawkeyes, and you play Northwestern, who was vying for that Big Ten conference just last year, and then you finish your season hosting Wisconsin. Those could potentially be the games if Minnesota goes undefeated. They could also see themselves at the bare minimum getting into that top 10 and having a really good bowl game. If they finish undefeated, there is potential that the committee could say, well, we could throw them in as a very low percentage chance. I don't think they'll get in if they go undefeated, but they'll need a lot of help.
Yeah, I don't think the committee's going to put in two Big Ten teams. Honestly, even with Ohio State, Penn State, I don't think both of them are going to make the college football playoff. Only one of them is. And, say Minnesota wins out, I think they can definitely make it in to the top 10. Maybe even into the top 6. You never know, but they're definitely not going to be in that top 4. But they definitely have a shot at a good bowl game.
Honestly, what I see right now, the top 6 are not going to change. It's going to be the same ones. They're just going to move around a few places. Baylor and Minnesota are going to play each other in a pretty good bowl game. Honestly, I would put those two in a game together because that would be a great game, honestly. But as of right now, the winner of LSU-Alabama, they're going to stick in their same spot. Kind of depends on that. If LSU beats Alabama, maybe in the next one you see LSU jump to 1 and Ohio State jump down to 2. And then when Ohio State and Penn State play each other, that's a 1 and a 4 spot potentially moving, or a 2 and a 4 spot potentially moving. So, like I said, these 6 are not going to move at all. But Minnesota and Baylor went out the rest of the season, you're going to get a good bowl game.
And speaking of those 6, let's kind of now transition that into picking our top 6. I know we've kind of heard what Nolan's been thinking, but we'll kind of go down now from the 6th seed all the way up to the number 1 seed in that order, from 6 down to 1, or up to 1 rather, depending on how you look at it. But Sam, go ahead and we'll start with you. Who do you have at your number 6 spot?
Right now, number 6 for me is Georgia. I think that's the perfect spot for them. They had a bad loss at home against South Carolina, but they do have, a good win against Notre Dame at home, and they do have Florida left on the schedule to play, I believe, and they have a chance with all the moving parts that's going to be happening in the college football playoff. They have a chance to get into that top 4, but right now they're on the outside looking in my eyes.
Yeah, Georgia's my number 6 as well. I think that, like Sam said, perfect spot for them. They still got to play Auburn, and they still have to. I think they still have Florida left.
They have Auburn, and then they
played
have
Florida
A&M.
already, so yeah,
They
they
already
have
played Florida. Okay.
So they have Auburn left, so that's another resume builder. But 6 is the perfect spot for them. They don't deserve the top 4, but with how much this moving around is going to happen in the next 2 weeks, Georgia's in a good spot.
I've went back and forth about where I think that some of these teams should be. I've thought about putting Oregon into that number 6 spot. Looked at their schedules. Georgia has played some much better competition. Obviously, you win against top 10 Florida. You win against, at the time, I believe they were very highly ranked 15th Notre Dame at the time or something like that.
Might have been top 10.
They might have even been top 10, but they were at close enough to that top 10 spot where the best competition Oregon has played was week 1 when they played Auburn, and they lost at the waning seconds of that game.